Hello and welcome to Everyday Tarot, your daily dive into the divine wisdom of the tarot. I'm your host, Camille A. Saunders, healer, tarot enthusiast, and your local witch next door. And today I'll be talking about the Three of Swords. Whether you're a seasoned tarot reader or just starting to explore, this podcast offers daily insights, intuitive messages, and practical advice drawn from the cards. Each episode is designed to help you connect with your inner wisdom, find clarity in your decisions, and tap into the energy of the universe. Tune in every day, Monday through Friday, for fresh perspectives and empowering guidance from the tarot as interpreted by me. If you love the show, the best way to support it is by listening daily, leaving a review, and subscribing or following in your favorite podcast app. For monthly hangouts, tarot Q&As, individual readings, and more, check out the Everyday Tarot Patreon family. If you're local to the greater Puget Sound area, you can check out the Let's Talk Tarot meetup group for the latest event postings. And if you're not local to my area, you can join me for a virtual tarot card creation event Friday, June 20th at 5 p.m. Pacific Daylight Time. I'll give you a list of recommended supplies. We'll meet online and I'll walk you through the process of creating your own cards. Get the date on your calendar now and be on the lookout for the sign-up page coming soon. If you're interested in my free PDF with the 2025 5-card tarot spread I created just for you at the beginning of this year, you can get that by joining my newsletter list. My weekly newsletter always has the most up-to-date information on upcoming events, presentations, and more. And if you don't already know, I'm a sex and relationships therapist seeing clients virtually all over Washington State. I love working with queer, poly, and witchy clients who might be struggling with anxiety, chronic pain or illness, communication issues, self-advocacy, and sex. You can book a free 20-minute consultation now to see if we're a good fit to work together. And you can always find the links for any of these offers in the show notes or on my website, CamilleASaunders.com/everydaytarot, in addition to the images of the cards I pull. All right, so now we are into Season 8, where I'm talking all about the Suit of Swords, going through each card one per episode. If you haven't listened to my other seasons yet, you should check those out. In Season 1, I talked tarot basics. In Seasons 2 and 3, I went through all the major arcana cards and an overview of the 4 suits. In Season 4, I talked tarot and pop culture. In Season 5 was all about tarot spreads. Season 6 was about the Suit of Wands. Season 7, the Suit of Pentacles. And here we are now in Season 8 talking about the Suit of Swords. If you want to hear an episode dedicated to an overview of the Suit of Swords, you can check out episode 37. And today we're talking about the Three of Swords. So images or symbols associated with a specific card are hearts, blood, heartbreak, sadness, tears, and rain. This is there's some major arcana cards that are sort of famous and then often are seen in pop culture, like Death or the Devil, the Lovers, the Tower, some of those. But this is one of the minor arcana cards that shows up a lot, since it is sort of stereotypically known as the heartbreak card. It often shows a heart with 3 swords kind of stabbed through it. Sometimes there's like blood or tears or rain coming out of it. So that's kind of the common depiction. I tried to go through my decks and pick some of the decks that had cards that weren't necessarily the traditional depiction, since we see that a lot. So in the Anima Mundi Tarot deck by Megan Lyra London, we have sort of a different iteration of this card, so in this deck, these swords, which are an air sign, depict birds. And so in this card, it's actually a bird with 3 swords stabbed through it, which is pretty rough. And the bird does not look great. I don't think we see any blood or anything, but there's definitely rain and very dark, like cloudy, like rain clouds in the background. In the Therapist Who Tarot deck by prompts by Drea Bloom and images by Rebecca Bloom, we see sort of a person, we see their face, and then the rest of the body is sort of like a blob, I would say. And they have very like melancholy colors, like purple, gray, pretty dark and like nudie. And then we see sort of that, again, they see these 3 swords, one of which literally looks like it goes almost like how a safety pin or like a needle would work, where it goes like in the person, you see it on one side and then it kind of comes out the other, but we can actually see it on top of the person. And then the other two swords are sort of behind them. We just see them go in and then out on the other side. We don't see them in the middle. But the word associated with this card in this deck is strength, which I think is interesting because I think often, again, this card is depicted as like a heartbreak card or like you're going through it, but right, the other sort of vein of what happens when you're going through it is like finding strength or sometimes finding, um, yeah, that like you can make it through that time, even though it is challenging, it's not very fun. So there are reflection questions on the back of this card that are: who is always happy to see you? What is your relationship with community, in quotes? And then who or what is it time to welcome into your life? So sort of instead of the, again, like I would say like traditional depiction of the card, which is like letting go or like a relationship ending, this is all about, right, what relationships do you want to keep? Like who's happy to see you, right? What's your relationship with community? Like who's in your community? What does that mean to you? Who are you choosing to have in your space? And right, and by that also meaning who are you choosing to not be in community with? And then what is time to welcome into your life? And maybe that is, right, something new, or it's time to welcome some boundaries into your life. But I like this depiction of the card because I think it sort of has the flip side of what's normally talked about, which is like, oh, again, like you're going through it, or you're having a hard time, or it's like this transition card, which I think is true. Um, but it's just kind of interesting that they choose to depict this as a strength. Um, yeah, I guess in the Anima Mundi deck, I'm looking at the card description now, and it says it often indicates a time of pain and heartbreak, but it also encourages you to use this pain as a lesson learned. Accept your loss, release the pain, and move on from the past behind you. Um, so it also is about, right, like letting go of things, but also like transmuting the pain and not just sitting in it, like allowing it to happen, going through the emotion, processing it instead of maybe pushing it down or hoping it wasn't there. And then in the Goddess of Love tarot deck, this is probably one of my favorite depictions of the Three of Swords here. It shows so it's like a love deck. So there's a lot of roses and pink and stuff. So it shows like a red rose in the middle. Then there's like a person's eye like on top of it. And then we see they sort of have like tears coming out of the eye that are like golden. We see the three swords sort of stabbing through it as it normally is, but they're behind the rose. They don't actually necessarily look like they're stabbing through it. It's more like the rose is on top of it. And this is a collage style card, or deck, so that is kind of how the deck is. And then we see these like pink gemstones in all the corners of the card that are like pink hearts. They look kind of like quartz, maybe, like quartz, like the rock. And then in the background, we have pink. And then again, there's sort of clouds. And then we get these other little, I don't exactly know what the image is, but almost like teardrops or raindrops, but they're almost like leopard colored. I don't know, that sounds strange, but I'm not totally sure what like the image is that's on them, but there's sort of three in between each heart in the corners and the rose and swords in the middle. And in here it talks about um, the card's about endings. Even if you know it's for the best, that things weren't meant to be, the grief and sadness are real. Instead of running away, the goddess asks you to find tenderness and care for yourself. Don't resist the pain, but find ways to move through it, to see the shadow work as a chance to untangle what led you here and what knowledge you can take into the next rodeo. Each heartbreak is a lesson, one that teaches you what you do and don't want, what you deserve, and what matters. And I think that that's very much the depiction in the Therapist Who Tarot deck, which is like what matters. You know, where are your boundaries? Like where do you draw the line? There, what what sort of behavior do you allow other people to, or things to say about you, or what behavior, or how are you going to remove yourself from situations where people are not sort of respecting your boundaries in that way. In the Library of Esoterica, tarot book by Taschen, they talk about that the Three of Swords is about letting go and dealing with disillusionment. The Three of Swords demands we get to the heart of matters and that when challenged, we rely on logic rather than emotion. So this is like a very emotional card, and I think it's important to name that, right? That doesn't mean like repress the emotion or shove it down or not allow it, right? Like it's okay to allow emotions. We should do that. Otherwise, they're just going to pop back up whenever whenever they sort of like a whack-a-mole, we're gonna knock them down over here, and then they're gonna pop up somewhere else. But that, right, that we're maybe not making decisions from that place of emotion, and that like when we allow ourselves to move through the emotions, through the grief or sadness, and actually sit with it and take time and feel it and allow it, then it makes it easier to actually release it on the other side. And also that, like, when we really think about it, again, like boundaries or dealing with, I like the word disillusionment too, because it's sort of this idea that maybe you thought it was this way, but that doesn't necessarily mean that that was true. Just because you thought this about a person or a situation or a job, or something, like, and then it didn't end up happening, that doesn't mean that that wasn't, what am I trying to say? I guess like there are illusions involved, right? We might have certain expectations or illusions about something, and that sometimes this card can also be about like the heartbreak of realizing that those illusions were never true, and that now we're dealing with like the disillusionment, right? We're dealing with the fact that like, oh, that was never actually true, and I believed that, and now like I'm having to deal with kind of like the consequences of realizing what that person or that job or whatever the situation is actually is. And I think that's kind of where like the logic aspect is. Again, sometimes we can get really swept up in things or sort of not see red flags or push them aside or ignore them because we're like, oh, I just want this to be good. I want this to be true. I want this person to be the person for me. And sometimes that can really cloud like our judgment. And I feel like this card's also saying, right, that like, okay, once we're sort of slightly removed from the situation, or once we have released some of the emotions or the grief of things not meeting our expectations, then we're allowed to actually see what is happening, what is true and not true, and to make a decision from that place. All right, so in the Tarot and Astrology book by Karine Kenner, they talk about that the Three of Swords is associated with Saturn in Libra. It says most of the versions of this card featured blood-filled beating heart pinned to the backdrop of rain and clouds by three silver swords. The second decan of Libra is ruled by Saturn, the ringed planet of boundaries and limitations, and at this point Libra is forced to recognize its restrictions all too well. That explains the grief and sorrow associated with this card. Despite the fact that Libra is at the height of its power and potential, it's not free to float among the clouds as its airy intellectual nature would like. Instead, Libra is weighed down by the worldly restrictions that Saturn imposes. Some of those impediments are simply the result of being human. On Earth, our time is limited. Our physical, spiritual, and emotional energy is closely tied to our bodies and our surroundings. In Roman mythology, Saturn was the Titan god who consumed his own children. The Greeks knew Saturn as Kronos, the god of time, and those ancient myths illustrate the fact that no one lives forever and that time will eventually take us and all our creations too. Libra's emphasis on relationships also generates its own fair share of sorrow. While we tend to idealize seventh house issues of love, romance, marriage, and partnerships, it's a sad fact of life that affairs of the heart almost never come without a price. Even the best relationships demand to be constantly weighed, balanced, and adjusted. And it says that's where the iconography of the Justice card comes into play. The Justice is the card that's assigned to the entire month of Libra, and the Like image associated with Libra is often those like scales of justice where it's like weights and you like have to balance things on either side. And the imagery of the Three of Swords, it says, is vaguely reminiscent of the scales of justice. The swords might be gruesome, but the illustration itself is perfectly balanced with two swords on either side of a central pivot point. So again, if you look at your cards, like the swords are this like very symmetrical image. That's true in two of mine that I'm looking at, but not so much in the Therapist Who Tarot deck. Let's see. It says in a tarot reading, the Three of Swords often symbolizes hearts that have been broken by infidelity, divorce, or miscarriage. I think also just this like aspect of expectations, where again we can kind of allow ourselves to like have these certain ideas and expectations about things, and then when we kind of see them to finally not be so true. Or yeah, that we see these like extremes happening, then like that middle sword, right, demonstrates like the painful compromise that's possible. There, like that balance in the middle, like the fulcrum, right, of a point that like, okay, like which side are you going to lean to? Are you going to fall into maybe what other people want or say or think you should do, or are you going to sort of be on the side of self and like your own boundaries and what's good for you? Okay, in the Fearless Tarot book by Elliot Adam, they talk about that this card is about forgiveness. It says the swords pictured on the card need to be drawn out and released from the heart so it can heal. Sounds easy, right? Well, it's not. It's because the only thing that can give you the power to release the sword from the wound is forgiveness. Are you unable to forgive individuals from the past who betrayed you? Do you still get angry and feel victimized? What emotions do you feel when you conjure up an image of this person? Hatred, revenge, rage, or sadness? It says the heart on this card is a victim of devastating injury. There's also often this rain that pelts down on the sunken heart. And also like right and proportionally the heart is quite large compared to the swords often. If we think about they truly were these giant swords, even on the Anima Mundi deck where it's a bird, the bird is like the swords are like the size of a bird, which would be sort of absurd if you really think about it. That could never quite happen, especially because this bird's quite small. It looks like a wren, I think. And so there's also this aspect of like, oh, the heart is stronger and we are more resilient, even when we are wounded in that way. Yeah, the Three of Swords reminds us that even though another may have put a metaphorical sword in our heart through a past betrayal, we perpetually betray ourselves by not letting go and releasing the resentment. Swords represent power, and sometimes the heart may want to hold on to the swords because it feels that somehow it now possesses more power, even though they're literally going through the heart, right? Sometimes that sense of power is held on to for dear life. We don't want to be caught off guard again, right? If we hold those three swords, which again, if you think about it, if you tried to hold three swords at the same time, it would be very challenging. Two swords max, probably. And that like they're talking a lot about forgiveness. I have complicated feelings about forgiveness, I'm going to say. Just that I think we have to figure out how to release the emotion or energy of like betrayal or things not going the way we wanted. I think forgiveness is one way to talk about it, but I also think that like in its most generous way, forgiveness is about the fact that that person might never change, that situation might not change. And so when you hold on to the energy of resentment or things like that, that can also be very damaging. And that in its most generous sense, forgiveness is about you letting go of like that part, that energy, that negativity, and releasing it, perhaps through forgiving someone or a situation. But I also think that just moving through the emotions, right, figuring out like, again, when you're able to, like lessons learned or ways that maybe you overstepped your boundaries or you allowed those red flags, because we also have to think about betrayal of self. Again, like if you think about a heart and with three swords through it, it's like, were those three separate people that put swords through a heart? Like, was this you put one in and two other people did? Did someone else put two swords into you and then you did one? Like, it would be, it's just interesting to think about, right? One sword through the heart would probably be enough. If we're thinking about, like, in reality, the damage that would happen. But when we have three here, it's almost this, like, um, excess where, again, it can kind of get into the, like, masochistic, self-flagellating part of ourselves that might want to just, like, really sit in that feeling of betrayal or this shouldn't have happened, which can be, right? I think there's a place for that. I just think we have to figure out, again, if other people don't change or if situations happened and those are now over, like, how are you going to continue moving forward? Like, is it forgiveness? Is it grieving? Is it all of the above? Is it, releasing resentment of other people or situations? Is it setting firmer boundaries for the future? Like, how much energy do you want to give to that person and situation going forward? It can be this feeling of, like, wanting to punish other people. But I think a lot of times when we're moving from that place, I think often it's never going to feel like they've been punished enough for you to feel satisfied. And often what we think is going to punish other people, they don't care or they don't really change their behavior, which is also maybe the other part that we want them to do. And so I think thinking about, right, again, like, how do you want to move forward? What does it look like for you to process the situation in that way? And how can we, again, kind of like let go of our own resentment of self or that we should have known better or seen the red flags and, like, learn lessons for next time, but also, again, kind of keep ourselves protected and our boundaries there. Yeah, so in the Jessica Dora book, Tarot for Change, they talk about what I was saying there. One sword would be sufficient to illustrate heartbreak, but in this card we see three. A central sword might represent the emotion we tend to lead with, but it's not the whole story. Just as expressions of anger or sadness rarely give us a full picture of what lies beneath. The two swords on each side symbolize emotions that might sit under or alongside, screaming in rage or crying in despair. Ones that are often harder to express because they are either less tolerable or were seen as less acceptable in childhood or both. That the Three of Swords includes all three tells us that all three are important, and all three may need to be addressed so that the heart can heal. Address rage, and you will often find deep grief, guilt, or shame waiting to be acknowledged as well. When dealing with difficult emotions, you want to find a way to feel each feeling in the cluster. There are many ways to call up emotions: journaling, dance, dialogue, art, or spiritual practice. If you're planning to do this, keep in mind that you've been defending against the scariest emotions for a reason, so learning to feel them will require discernment, patience, and compassion for yourself. We learned in the cup suit that emotions are like water and that they can flood and overwhelm us, draw our feet from the ground, and sweep us away. Imagine that you're on a beach dipping into the ocean. Pay close attention to the currents. Don't go farther out than you'll be safe to go, and if necessary, ally yourself with a professional, a lifeguard type who can ensure you stay afloat when the waves get strong. I think that that's, like, a great analogy there. They also talk about, remember that learning to tolerate distress is a marathon, not a sprint. No one's grading or timing you, so go at your own pace and reserve the right to take breaks. As you start to build up tolerance with the really tough stuff, you can challenge yourself to feel the hardest feelings for 2 minutes without using a numbing or avoidance strategy, then 2 hours, then 4 hours, then 6, and as you go, they say, I think you'll learn some important secrets about the lifespan of the really intense ones. I think it's also important to speak about that often when we start allowing ourselves to, again, like, feel those things, like they talk about in the book, that feel that anger, and then often there is this grief or sadness or resentment or feelings underneath, that it can be this, like, feeling of unsafety or, like, really uncomfortable. and that they're sort of talking about, right? Like, do it for a little bit, dip your toe in the water, like practice it. It is a practice. Um, and that there are going to be these things that come to mind or reasons you create for yourself as to why you can't do it, why you can't feel that emotion, why they should deal with it, why I want to punish them, why they should just change their behavior. But again, we have to sort of think about like, what do we actually have control over, which is ourselves and not a lot else. And think about like, how do you want to move forward? How, if we actually allow ourselves to feel the emotions, like they said, for just 2 minutes to start, um, feel it and to not, use distractions or numbing or other things to sort of soothe us to help us, as we say, like feel better. That there is sort of like raw exposure, I think, of the feeling that comes about, and that that's okay, and that it just takes a while and it takes practice. And like they said, it can be helpful to have support, whether that's like a therapist or supportive person or a mentor or someone that can be there with you when you're going through that process, because you are going to create or say, right, have excuses or ideas or reasons you can't do it. I've definitely experienced that of like, oh no, it's too hard, I can't do that. Or oh no, that's too easy, that's not actually releasing the emotions. How do I do it? What, like for me, I know it shows up as like confusion of like, oh no, just like tell me the process one more time. Where it's like the process is just sitting and like breathing and like letting the emotion come up and sitting in it for a moment and then feeling out like, okay, is it less? Is it this? Where does it go? What do I want to do about that? All right, so let's go ahead and dive in and see what the cards have to say on this topic. And yeah, I'm going to be thinking about, how do we actually release emotions? What do we do with those feelings of, or what do we do when we feel like, oh, this is really uncomfortable, I don't want to do it, and coming up with excuses in that way. And just thinking about, what part do we have to play? What strengths can we pull forward within ourselves in this challenging moment? And how do we not, self-shame or self-flagellate or, to sort of blame ourselves for not doing better. Okay, this says the patron. Oh yeah, so I pulled cards from the Citadel, a Fantasy Oracle by Fen Inkrite. And I pulled the patron, which it says is about mentorship and finances. Interesting. Okay. I almost flipped to it. So I pulled it upright, so I'm going to read the upright definition. It says, amongst the chatter and music of the salon, one voice rises above the others, confident and companionable. The patron has achieved a certain level of success and prosperity and makes it their business to know everyone around them, particularly those with talent who might just need a little extra support to fulfill their potential. The patron indicates that a period of mentorship is beginning for you. Either someone is due to enter your life, offering support and advice, or someone is looking to you for guidance. Whether it is you or someone else who is taking on the role of patron, focus your energy on this new union as it will bring a period of stability and empowerment to both of you. Well, that's lovely. So yeah, think about in your life, is there someone that's recently come into your life that is in this mentor role? Or is that you and that you are sort of the patron? And again, when we think about what patron is about, it has often been someone that's financially supporting someone through a process of like an artistic process, backing someone with, money or support, both, and saying like, you are doing the work, you're doing the good work, and I want to support you through that. So that is sort of that like mentorship angle, but also this financial place of like, you're being held here in support, and now you get to do your thing. About that. Okay, so links for the tarot decks I talk about will be in the show notes and on my website if you'd like to look at them or purchase them. And thanks for joining me today on Everyday Tarot. Just as a reminder, the podcast comes out daily, Monday through Friday for all of 2025. All right, see you soon. Bye-bye.